because at one time the Grand Duke used to be settled there, and when the revolution took place, the innumerable Russians who came from the east of Russia, where the Black Sea is, you know, and they were taken in charge by the British and brought to mostly to England. Russians who were not communist, you might say, who were against it, but couldn't do anything about it because all that country was taken over by the communists. That's why the family business broke down completely, because the family business was before, in the time of the Tsar, all that southern part of Russia was wheat fields, enormous amount of wheat, and farmers who produced the wheat. And the government didn't think very much about it, because they were so rich anyhow, they didn't bother very much about the wheat. But when the communists came in, they took over all the farms of the peasants and said, these farms now belong to the government. You've got to work here, and you've got to produce the wheat, the bread, but you can't sell it because we are against the other countries who were non-communist, you see. And so it was a terrible loss for the peasants in that part of what's name at that time. And the family had offices at Marseilles, and that's where most names people came from. Lally, her part of the family was a young man who was put in charge in Marseilles for the wheat from Russia for France and Europe, whereas the other wheat went by boat to Great Britain. And that was the headquarters of the place, because the British had they had the main part of the bread, what's them, so came to Britain. But of course, when the communists came in, they took over, and from then on, the British took all the wheat from America. Before that, the Americans' wheat fields didn't exist. They were far out to the east. The farmers, when they didn't have the wheat fields like they had afterwards. When Great Britain needed wheat from America, all the farmers in that part of America produced the wheat necessary for Great Britain and everything, all the country, the Allies too. They took over from Russia, who afterwards did nothing. They couldn't do anything. The Russians, you see, in the time of the Tsars, they had so much of this bread they couldn't be bothered with the farmers in the south of Ukraine and all that part. They didn't bother about it because they had all the ones. But when the communists came in, they needed the bread, and they took all those farmers' land, and it became the communist party's land, and all the wheat the peasants brought up, it was taken by the government and not by the farmers. So it's a terrible blow for them. And there were several firms, apart from the Vaglianos, who took the bridge, the bread they could from the Ukraine. There were several other companies, but the Vagliano family was the biggest one. It was the biggest company because they had the people in London. And London became the headquarters for the Vagliano family for the bread. Until the communists took over, you see, so they had to give it up. They gave up. The Vaglianos had to give up the business completely.
Okay, let me see here. Nope. Seems like it's gone to sleep.
Marseilles was the center for Europe. And from Marseilles, they sent the bread was sent to Germany and to other countries like that. You see. The boats came into Marseilles, and the wheat was sent on from Marseilles to Germany and the other countries, apart from France. But the man in Marseilles had been a young boy, and he was in Russia and he wanted to get in the business. And they said, "Oh, okay, but first you must learn how to work the wheat boats." And so he became captain. He became captain of one of the boats taken from Ukraine to Marseilles. And from Marseilles it was sent up to Europe. And that is the family that Lally comes from. He was a young boy. He was very keen, and the ones in London were the head of the firm.
Hold on, let me see.
What's happening here?
Come here. Sure, come here. Being a little loud. Sorry.
But
So,
Lally's grandfather was the one who represented the family in Marseilles, and he became a very important man because he had his own ship at the beginning. He was captain of one of his ships, and afterwards he took over the Marseilles centre, and Lally's family came from that one member of the family who settled in Marseilles, and it was a centre practically for Europe for the wheat and what's happened to me I don't know, and London of course it was the centre because there was no bread in America in those days. In the East, all the bread in America came from the extreme east of America later on, where they had thousands and thousands of wheat fields they produced, and farmers who produced the wheat in America. But before that, wheat didn't exist. I mean, it was only a small amount of things that was happening in America at the start when America became an important country. But the wheat fields took over from Russia.
I have a question. How did the family's shipping contacts help Helen during the war? Did it help the rescue?
In the war?
Yes. Did they? Were the people who were rescued from France Was it helped by the shipping contacts?
Well, the shipping was more or less come to an end by.
It had come to an end, right?
Yes, because the Americans and the South Americans were beginning to take over when the war started with Germany. But of course, the wheat from America was stopped. Wasn't sent to England anymore. It was sold in America. Americans took over the wheat, their own wheat, you see. And before, England had been getting all the wheat from America coming over, and they were selling it in Europe, you see. And so it was a very big firm, very important firm. The European wheat firm at that time, with the wheat coming from Ukraine, in Russia, where the whole country was there were fields and fields and fields of wheat, you see, until the communists took over. Then they took it and they sold it all over Europe themselves. They took it for themselves too, because the Grand Dukes and people like that, they didn't bother about it. They could get in their own land. They could have Ukraine farms and their own, but they didn't sell it abroad. They kept it for themselves, you see. But when the communists came in, they took over everything, you see.
Right.
And the farmers were left standing. Oh well.
Here's one. So, who provided the ships that rescued people from France, from the south of France during the war? That Helen
Who were the people who
provided the ships that
that's
rescued people from the south of France during the war?
I think mostly they went by train through
By
to
train.
Spain,
Okay.
or by, and then in Spain they went to Portugal in buses and things like that. And Portugal, they were taken over by the British, who had the main shipping firms, stopped there, took these people, or by plane, or they were sent to England by plane from Portugal. But Portugal was a centre they were sent to. But the people who did it were people who were against the Germans, in other words. It didn't mean that there was a particular race of people, but they were the people who were against German occupation of the South of France, which they captured. They took an enormous number of people and killed them. So it's, see what the war can do.
Right. Well, are there streets named after Hélène in Cannes? How else is she remembered?
Who?
How else is Hélène remembered in Cannes besides the service? How is she remembered?
Oh, she's remembered
In
by the
service.
every year they have
Right.
a service for her. The mayor and most of the people who are now in charge in the country, in the town, they know about her, although they were very much not in Cannes at that time. There are a lot of the people now who run the south of France, who come from other parts of France and settle there and are running the country, mayors of the various towns and things. But the ones who were there during the war, everybody knows about her. And this, every year they have this service at a certain date at the Russian church, and just was him. But you see, most of the people who are running the towns of Nice and Cannes and towns like that, they had very little knowledge of what was going on in the war. They weren't in Cannes, they came from other parts of France and settled in there. But there's no doubt about it that every year this service takes place on the hill above Nice. They have troops, soldiers who turn up there, company of Chasseurs Paris or something like that, and they have a service with the troops on the hill where this shooting took place, and they have the names of all the crosses for the names of all the people who were shot by the Germans there. And then when the Germans had done that, they flew from Nice, the Nazis, into Italy, because the Allies had landed in the south of France, and landed at Toulon, and they advanced straight into Cannes and Nice, and the Germans had to retreat into Italy and disappear finally from Italy into Germany, because the Italians made peace with the Allies finally.
Right.
But during the time it was terrible, because the Germans didn't hesitate to arrest people who had the slightest interest in the Allies, anything like that. And dozens of people were arrested and shot by the Germans, chiefly at Nice. Cannes too.
Cannes too.
Yes. There was a Cannois who saved an awful lot of people being not been shot, because he went to the German general who was in charge of Cannes, Nice, and explained the whole thing to him, that he would be considered as being responsible for this torture and shooting if he continued to do it instead, as they retreated, to collect all these people they thought were against them and shoot them. And finally he gave it up, this German. He gave it up, and then he was taken prisoner by the Germans themselves, and they shot him. But they were already out of the country then.
Mm. Wow.
They had a terrible time in the war down there in the south.
Right.
You see, so many people, especially Jews, settled there, thinking that the Germans would take the north part of France, but they wouldn't take the whole of France, and they could go on with their business, shops and things like that on the coast. And that, of course, didn't last. The Germans took over, and they took all these Jews and people who had these shops and who were against the Nazis, and destroyed them, killed them. There you are.
Were most of the people who Hélène helped Jews, or were they all sorts of people?
Were they people who helped the Jews?
Where the people, no, Did Helene help mostly Jews, or were there all
Well,
different kinds of people?
Oh, no, she did anybody, not only the Jews, she did send a lot of Jews she sent to America. They got out of the country through Spain, but all the people who tried to get out, it didn't matter what nationality they were, what they were people who had shops and things, or were against the Germans anyhow, and she got them through to Portugal, where they were put on planes to England or boats to America, you see. But she was one of these people who was responsible for it. But she wasn't the only one. There was quite a group. I mean, in England it was organized, we might say. They had English people who were working to get these people out of southern France. And she was working with them. She had done her schooling in England, like I had. She'd been in school in England.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you, she did terrific work.
Oh, yeah.
Terrible work.
Yeah. Okay, the only thing left, can you just say your full name and when and where you were born again? Because I didn't get it on the video.
Full name of what?
Oh, of yourself and where and when you were born.
Well, I was born in Paris, 15th of July, 1911.
Okay. And you're...
I was named, I suppose, I know my father was playing golf, and I think it was the one golf course at that moment in Paris, and he used to play a lot of golf, and they told him he had to come back because the child was coming immediately, and so he was very annoyed. He had to drop his game. He was in the middle of the game, and he came home to Paris, the Rue de la Faisanderie, where they lived, Rue de la Faisanderie in Paris, and I didn't come until the next day. He was very annoyed because he didn't finish his game of golf. That's what I was told. I don't know. And my father had been, my grandfather, you see, was who had worked in the firm, Greek, and he'd settled in Paris. And my father and his brothers were born in France, but they had Greek nationality. They were the first members of the family born in France, and he did his schooling. He was his father, my grandfather, sent him to England, and he went to Eton. He went to a prep school, and then he went to Eton, and then he went to Oxford, and his brother too, Stefan Vagliano, the two of them. They'd been at Eton and Oxford University, and then they came back to Paris. Well, they're French, but they lived in France. They lived in Paris, and then during the war, my father and my mother and my brothers and us, the children, they went to England, and we were put to school in England when we were old enough. We went to school in England and we did our work. I should have gone to Eton and Oxford.
Yep.
But Eton, it was full, they couldn't take me, so I went to a school called Canford School, which was a new school starting in Dorset, and became a very big, important school. And then instead of going to Oxford, I did the examination to university, but I had to do military service.
Military service.
And then I said I'd do it after military service. And when that came, it was a war that came, so I never went to Oxford. passed the examination into Christchurch, Oxford, like my father was.
Hmm. Well, thank you very, very much for this.
Well, I don't know, I've told you a lot of things. I don't know if I can go on telling you things, but
You've been very helpful, very helpful.
yes, well, if you like, if I can think of anything special, I can tell you. All I know is that my mother was the daughter of one of the Vaglianos who was working in London for the firm. She was a Vagliano too, but she was the firm. There were quite a number of Vaglianos who were vague cousins and things like that. And her father was one of the people who had a business in London. And my grandfather was the one represented the family in Paris. And the other one was at Marseilles, and that was Luddy's grandfather. He was in charge of the Vagliano firm at Marseilles. And my grandfather and grandmother were in Paris. My father and his brothers, my cousin, Uncle Stefan and Uncle Andre, they were all born in France, but they became Greece. They did their military service in the Greek army. What's her name? Her sister, my aunt, Mary, she married a Frenchman who was, what was his name now? He was an officer in the army, the French army. The Kersins. Kersins were an old French family who who dated from the time of the Revolution. He was an admiral, the original Kersin, and he was French admiral at the time of the Revolution and all that. And then he had to give it up because he wasn't good enough for the people he worked for. The Kersin, he worked as completely mad, and he worked for the against the government, as you might say. He was an admiral, but he was against the government, and so he ended up rather badly. But the Kersins were nautical people, sailors, because this Kersin had a grandson who was an admiral, and during the Great War, and he was represented. He represented the fleet in North Africa and in Spain. Not the south of France, the south part of France, which is where there's a certain amount of shipping, royal shipping, Marseilles and people like that. And he was in charge there. And one day he was colonel of this center for the officers, to train the officers. And there was a group of young officers turned up, and they were presented to him. He went in front of each one, you see, and said your name and what's name. And he came to a black one, a black officer, and he said, your name, please. And he said, Sous-Lieutenant de Kersin. He said, I'm Colonel de Kersaille.